What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023. I am one of your hosts, Sean Murphy, and today I'm joined by a special guest. He is an NBA reporter for SDPN, specifically covers the Toronto Raptors quite a bit in person, but covers the entire league for SDPN. He is S. Berahini. S, what's going on, man? Thanks so much for taking the time and joining me. I think you're one of the best follows on NBA Twitter. Your content is absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you for having me. And I appreciate the kind words. I'm excited to talk Raptors, excited to talk Pistons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When we set this up, I didn't even fully realize that it was literally going to be the day after the
Good
Pistons and
timing.
Raptors.
Yeah.
Yeah, great timing. Yeah. You got a great dose of whatever the that was on Sunday. So that wasn't that nearing I know there were multiple franchise records that the Raptors either broke or
Or
neared
nearly.
in
Yeah.
that game.
Yeah, no. So they set the franchise record for assists in a game. They were two
Okay.
points away from the franchise record in points. And I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. You know what? Honestly, not not entirely something that we are unused to here in Detroit, but I
Fair.
mean, hey, we're gonna talk all about and the beauty of it is, I mean, it's not just the Pistons, right? This entire league is just so deep and talented. And
Oh, yeah.
so, I'm just excited to, not just talk Pistons, but I mean, like you said, the Raptors are really fun. I've been interested in what's going on, what's been going on in the six. So I definitely want to get your thoughts on, on the developments that have been happening up there. But first, this is from Half Court. Normally, I am joined with a couple friends. This podcast actually is going to be in two parts. Troy will be joining later, but for now, it is going to be me and S talking all things at NBA and Pistons. If you like this video, be sure you like it down below. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification button, but also be sure you're following my people on social media. S, where can people find you on Twitter?
Whatever the name says right there, at just S Berahini. That's it. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's all. Yeah.
Cool, man. Sounds great. Yeah, be sure to go follow over there and also subscribe to SDPN Sports on YouTube as well. You can also find their work online as well at sdpn.ca. But let's get right into it. That game that happened on Sunday, the Pistons lost by nearly 40 points. It would have been almost 50 points if it wasn't arguably for Stanley Amude and some of the two-way players that came in and had a little bit of juice in the second half. Obviously, right now, as of recording, the Pistons are at 11 straight losses. However, as of right now, they're about to be starting their second game in a back-to-back against the Denver Nuggets. So 12 in a row does not seem out of the realm of possibility for this team. Now,
Oh, man.
obviously the people in Detroit are, they are tired of losing. They want to see a winning product on the basketball court.
Right.
But at the same time, and Darko even said this after the game in his press conference, like the next time the Raptors and the Pistons play, it's going to be an entirely different Pistons roster, just
Yeah.
with the amount of players that they had out of injury. From your perspective, kind of from the outside looking in, as someone who's kind of watched, the Pistons as more of, of an observer, what have been some of the, things that you have noticed that have been getting in this team's way? And what have been your thoughts of Cade Cunningham thus far as the season's gone on?
I'm glad you brought up Cade at the end because I think everything Pistons related sort of comes back to Cade.
Yeah.
And the build he is the block in which they are building everything on top of, right? So you want to see him succeed, you want to see him grow into the type of player that he's expected to grow into. And unfortunately, over the last couple of seasons, whether it be through his own injuries or injuries to other players, which is happening right now, he's not really been given the proper context to really be able to show off some of those things. It's leading to a lot of inefficient play. It's leading to a lot of turnovers. And I think Cade has to learn in a lot of ways, but I don't think where the Pistons are at right now is really helping fund that growth, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult situation to be in because you can see the clear talent that he is. Maybe he doesn't end up being the all NBA MVP generational type of talent that people touted him to be. But ultimately, like, this is a guy who can be a multi-time all-star And unfortunately, you're not able to get him to that type of potential because of the roster situation, because of the lack of spacing. In Toronto, we know it very well because Pascal Siakam has to deal in a closet of space. And I think you can see in a lot of ways, Cade Cunningham has to operate in a closet of space. Every time he drives, he's getting pinched into the paint. There's just like the defense is pinching into the paint. There's just not a lot of open space for him to operate in. Again, it's causing a lot of turnovers. It's causing a lot of inefficient shots. And those are areas where he needs to get better at too. But ultimately, it's sort of a double-edged sword because of the injuries, because of the context. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of curious to see where you're at with it too, because it feels like it's a very polarizing topic, not only on Pistons Twitter, but just the NBA in general, where some people are like, oh, we're out on Cade. Like this, if he can't do it, then he can't do it anywhere. And then some people are like, well, no, this is the context that you see. And hey, maybe in a better situation, he'd be a little bit better. So where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so I think to your point, like context really matters. And looking at the situation as a whole, and where he's at. I mean, first of all, when you have seen Cade, like with spacing, when he was healthy, when he was getting some rhythm going, like especially towards the end of his rookie season, Cade
Mhm.
was able to piece a lot of things together. And, even though there are absolutely, to your point, there are things he has to clean up, the turnovers,
Yeah,
are flat out a thing, that have been an issue throughout the entirety of his career to this point. But, what I would say is a couple things I think is important for people to keep in mind. I didn't realize this until earlier today. James Edwards III of The Athletic pointed this out. Did you know Michigan State's starting lineup to begin the season is older than the Pistons' current starting lineup? Michigan
wow, I
State
did not know that.
Michigan
That's
State basketball has, by average, an older starting lineup. They're starting 4th and 5th year guys, like 22, 23-year-old guys. You look at it like Cade's 22, Jaden Ivey's 21, Jalen
Assar is
Duren just
19,
turned
right?
20 last
Yeah,
week. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And I
yeah,
think another piece as well is like the injuries that Detroit had going into the season were extremely devastating in the sense that they were just about all of your key veterans,
right.
especially guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, who for my money is one of, if not the most underrated player in basketball with just some of the things he can do offensively. I was just blown away just by how, what he did with the volume that he was
Well,
given
also
last
the way
season.
he compliments Cade, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
the floor
Absolutely.
spacing, the secondary creation, all of that stuff is stuff that would help clean up the issues that you're seeing with Cade.
Yep.
And to another point, like Jalen Duren, like
Yes.
his vertical threat, the lob ability,
That
right? The
is
fact
literally
that he
where I was
can.
just about to go. We are right in sync.
No, go ahead. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All you, man. Listen, alley
No,
oop. I got you.
no.
I'll be the K to your Durant. Just go for it, man.
No,
I
I
got.
love this. No,
Yeah,
that was like a beautiful I was like, we are right on the same wavelength because people
yeah,
focus on spacing all the time and they just think the 3-point line, but the vertical spacing that Jalen Duren really showcased because the once Jalen Duren really started to not be at 100% this season is when the downturn really started to happen. Because if you
Mhm.
look like the Pistons, like they were down like double digits in multiple games to start the season, but when Jalen Duren was in the lineup, when he was healthy, when he was dominating the boards, this was a completely different team. But ever since he's gone out of the lineup like that, for all intents and purposes, that's the injury that kind of put Cade, even further in a closet, so to speak, because,
Mhm.
especially that pick and roll tandem. Like if Cade doesn't have that shooting at the very least, he had that. And,
Yep.
we saw, especially from the reports from, Team USA Select this summer, with how much chemistry those guys were building. I mean, we saw in the glimpses at the start of the season that has some real potential to it. That has some juice to it.
Yep.
So, I think it's obviously it's hard to tell Pistons fans to be patient when it's been 2008 since they've won a playoff game. But, in the same light, it's like it's not like help isn't on the way, right? Like Monte
Yeah.
Morris, Bojan Bogdanovic, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Livers is supposed to be making his, season debut at some point, but there is going to have, at some point this season, I do think Troy Weaver will begin to have to make some significant moves in order to put Cade Cunningham in the position to succeed going forward. Because, to your point, this whole thing rests on where Cade can go, how, what
Yeah.
his ceiling is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think, I'm not sure how big of fans Pistons are of the Houston Rockets, just because, there was that little beef going on for a little bit. But hey, you
Yep.
got the other Thompson twin, right? So solidarity, if you will, in the Thompson twin brothers. But I think looking at Houston this season, and I know it's really early, but just their ability, like they went out and they got a couple of guys that can help facilitate the growth of their main players. You're seeing Sengun pop off right now, or Şengün pop. I'm sorry, I do the Turkish pronunciation. Şengün pop off because of the presence of Fred VanVleet. Just having another ball handler there has worked out very, very well for him. You're seeing Jabari Smith Jr. figure it out a little bit more. We'll see what happens with Jalen Green, but ultimately, like, you do need to go out and get guys who can help facilitate growth for this team. And
Right.
yeah, Boyan is a big part of that. I think him being healthy is going to help this team a lot. I think Duran is going to be super important to this team, but maybe you still need a little bit more outside of that to just get spacing, to just get
Right.
shooters, guys who can, like, if you did like it's like the Bermuda Triangle between the Detroit Pistons, the Toronto Raptors, and the Orlando Magic in terms of no spacing. And
Yep.
I kind of relate to all three fan bases, because realistically, all teams see their stars struggle because they don't have that, they're kind of limited space wise to operate and to really thrive on the offensive end. So to me, it's just like, man, maybe you got to find out a better context, even if that context is not there on your team. And we're seeing that with Houston as an
Yeah.
example. I know it's early, but maybe that's an idea to have there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's, I think there's totally merit to the fact that, like, Houston went out and they directly addressed holes on their roster, that they had, and they did so, by, spending money. People could say whatever they want about Dylan Brooks from
Yeah.
playoff run last year, but he's one of the best perimeter defenders that we have in this league. And,
Great
the
3-point shooter now too, apparently, right? So
yeah, I guess so. I loved listening to Chris Vernon's rant about how he's become everything that he wanted him to be in Memphis.
right.
He's now
Yeah.
that in Houston. That I just gotta pick out of that. But no, I think the other piece of that as well that people don't consider is that with Cade Cunningham being out all of last year, there was not that evaluation time. Like, obviously, that, playmakers, people like Cade need, people who have the ball in their hands, they need spacers. Like, we
Mhm.
all get that concept, but at the same time, not having that time to evaluate and see Cade develop and grow, and see how the pieces that are in house fit around him, because he only played about 12 games last season. And even then, the roster that's currently constructed was dealing, with some form of injury issues before he, was out of the lineup last year too. So I mean, the reality of it is, whereas with Houston, even though they went through all those bumps, those, like they took their lumps, so to speak, at the very least, they were able to get a solid sample size of what their core looked like together, and they were able to go this summer and directly address that. Detroit could have gone out and made some additions in the free agency market, but if they did so, I think they would have had to significantly overpay for guys like Cam Johnson, who, is an absolutely great, wing for Brooklyn. I think super highly of his future, but has he played 60 games yet in his career? I think he's maybe done it once,
Mm.
in a season. So it's a tricky situation when you're a small market team, especially when you're wanting to take that next step, and
Yeah.
especially with just how deep the talent is,
No,
in
yeah,
this
yeah,
current
you're
league,
right. You're right. Like, there's always going to be the drawback of that type of stuff, and
for
like the
sure.
high risk, high reward stuff. What Houston did was a risk. Like, it is a
Yeah.
very risky thing to do. Um, I just ultimately think like this is where the Pistons are at right now,
Yep.
where and we haven't even talked about the Ivy piece of this, where it's
Yeah.
like, how is that gonna look, and what does the potential look like with that? Because last year he looked really good. Like,
Yeah.
I yes, obviously there's going to be quirks of and warts of a young rookie guard who is still trying to figure things out. Like, that was evident last year. But I told you off air, like, the Pistons were my guilty pleasure last season because I
Yeah.
enjoyed watching Ivy and Duran, and like they developed a little bit of a chemistry together. And I'm just curious to see why, maybe not necessarily why, because I kind of understand like the defensive logic, like, hey, let's focus on the defensive side of the ball first. But I just want to know what his place is on this team. Like,
Right.
are you going to fit him next to Cade? Does that make sense? And with Marcus Sasser kind of developing into a guy who looks pretty good as a rookie, especially at shooting, maybe it makes more sense. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting, how much of a how much of a storyline that has been, as early as it has. Obviously when Jaden Ivey went through the whole illness thing, there was kind of a whole conspiracy theory thing on the internet, like, oh, he's about to get traded. Obviously, too talented to, make
Right.
that type of move this soon. But, ultimately, I do think that is going to be like one of the looming, storylines as the season, goes along. I think with Killian Hayes, obviously I don't know how much of him starting the season, is exploring what a potential trade market for him looks like, seeing how much value you actually have going into a summer where he has an extension because, he is someone that that you could potentially bring in on a cheap deal and have, a value off your bench in some capacity.
Yep.
But I mean, at the same time, the infuriating thing with Killian and Monty, did bring up all the things he does well because Killian, for in a lot of ways, is a good basketball player. He just can't shoot the basketball to save his life.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so, you understand the premise of wanting, what he brings to the table on the court at any given time. But having said that, I think Jaden Ivey, just with his explosiveness, he's one of, if not the fastest player in the league. Just his end-to-end burst is unlike anything I've seen in
Yeah.
person. And so, I wholeheartedly agree that I think the ceiling of this team is higher with him in the picture. And I think a big focus of this season should be trying to get that on-court relationship or dynamic with him and Cade to work because I just, to your point, I think there's so much potential there. And I think ironically, a thing I see with Jaden, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this, but I think a lot of the times when he plays at his best is when he actually slows down a little bit. I think a lot
Mm.
of times he's such a fast player that he tries to go 110 miles an hour,
Yeah.
tries to force the
Yeah.
issue, so to speak, and make things happen. But a lot of times when he lets the game come to him and actually slow down and makes reads, I think, this there is a really high ceiling there in my
Yeah, no,
opinion.
I agree with you. I also think, that applies to a lot of the other faster guards in the league that we've
Yeah.
seen. Tyrese Maxey, the game is quote unquote slowed down for him. De'Aaron Fox, right?
Yeah.
Knowing how to use that speed is a real important thing. It's like the change of pace.
Yes.
Being fast is one thing, but the change of pace is the thing that's going to pop out to you. Jaden Ivey with an open court is like going to be incredible regardless, like an incredible transition player. But knowing how to do the stop and go stuff in the half court is going to be super important. And I think ultimately, like him and Cade could provide a good yin and yang, right?
Yep.
Because like Cade is like this probing, very slow, meticulous style, right? Like he's gonna try to like operate in a more poised manner, if you will. But then
Yeah.
Ivy can just like burst out the seam. And I think that can be something that can be paired well offensively if you have the shooting, if you
Yep.
have the spacing. And that's going to be a big part of what they are kind of in their future. But yeah, ultimately, like everything comes back to the floor spacing and how they're going to work that thing together. And it's funny because I think that sort of applies to the Toronto Raptors too. So
Yeah. No, 100%. And before we talk about the Raptors, I just gotta ask you about one more Pistons player just because
yeah.
I would be remiss if we didn't at least bring up Assar Thompson.
Oh
Just
yes, absolutely. Yeah,
just
let's do like 15 minutes on Assar.
I could yeah, I could do a whole like I honestly could just do like a segment every single week about
yeah.
how insane is Assar Thompson. And
Hmm.
obviously, you brought up Houston earlier. I still think, if Amen gets healthy and gets some time, I think he can be absolutely special
Absolutely.
too.
They both
I
look like studs. They really
I've
do.
become
Yeah.
a firm believer in the Thompson twins,
Hmm.
especially, during summer league, like I try not to overreact, but he was doing a lot of these things in summer league, and it was like, man, if some of this translates to the league,
Yeah.
like early, he's gonna be really good.
And you're
Just
seeing
about
pretty much all of it. Yeah.
yes. It's insane, and,
Yeah.
the thing that's crazy, too, is, like, the defensive game, he's already like, you could already make an argument for him to be all defensive team, like, it just on the level he's playing right now, but,
Yeah.
the other thing that, he's not the greatest shooter, obviously, and that's gonna be the ultimate, like, ultimate tale of, like, where his stature is in the league, but he's such a good cutter and such a good playmaker as well that, he already finds ways to get the ball in the basket in a lot of natural ways. And so, I know he's someone, outside of Detroit, he's getting a lot of love,
Mhm.
but I want to know your thoughts because I mean, man, he to me, he's been like one of, if not the saving grace of this season for sure.
Well, he's also been the saving grace of my fantasy team, so I thank him. He has been.
I
Listen, I
love
took a
that.
swing on him late in the draft, and he is making me look really, really smart right now. I think the plan to put him into the starting lineup has been an interesting strategy here, just because of the floor spacing. Like, you're not trusting an Assar Thompson shot. Most of the defenses are not trusting an
Right.
Assar Thompson shot. So it makes the spacing equation a lot harder. But the other intangible stuff, there's no questions. He has magnets in his hands when it comes to rebounding. It's just incredible to see. I made like the Dennis Rodman comp on Twitter, I think a while ago. I don't know.
Mhm.
But like it has similar traits in the sense that he just is great at telegraphing where the ball is going to go, and he lands there and he just grabs it. It's great. The defensive side of the ball is something that sticks out almost immediately. He has some of the best hands in the NBA. Just
Yep.
his ability to, like, the hand-eye coordination is great, but it's also the anticipation with that hand-eye coordination, on ball, off ball. It's just he has the whole package as a defender. And to your point, like, yes, he probably needs to work on the offensive side of the ball, both in terms of scoring and efficiency and all that stuff. But there have been games in which, like, he's looked pretty good offensively too. He had that 21-point game against the Hawks, I
Yep.
believe. And I think he looked great. Obviously, he got a lot of his buckets in transition, but just ultimately, his ability to be this hyper athlete is going to make him look really, really good on the court. I
Yeah.
wonder if his future is more as a 4 instead of a 3,
Mm.
just because he's a great rebounder. He can guard up in size because he's so strong, and just the hands and everything. I think it would make sense for him to be like that low man in the dunker spot, you know what I mean, in actions, because he's not going to be that much of a shooter, but hey, he's going to get you like 2-3 offensive rebounds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's funny because, like, every year we've said, well, look, man, the Pistons aren't good, but Cade Cunningham is a saving grace. Well, man, look, the
Yep.
Pistons aren't good, but Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren are a saving grace. Well, man, look, the Pistons
Yep.
aren't good, but Assar Thompson is a saving grace right now. And if they could just put it together, if they
Yep.
could just find a way to salvage and make that work, it'd be a lot of fun, man.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for it. I really am, because yeah, I want Detroit basketball to be good. I remember when I was a kid and they were awesome. So I
Yeah,
want them to
man.
get back to that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, 100%, man. The first team I got to grow up and watching was the Going to Work Pistons. So I mean, just
Mhm.
having that, like having that as the foundation, of my basketball fandom was I got super lucky on that front. So
Yeah.
yeah, the league is better when Detroit basketball is relevant.
Of course.
In my opinion, I might be biased, but
Yeah.
uh, another team that I think is, that the league's much better off when they're winning and when they're successful is the Toronto Raptors, a team that you get to cover, and be around on a pretty regular basis. And on this podcast, we actually do talk about them quite a bit, just because I've been particularly interested ever since Darko Rajakovic came in and took over as the head coach. Obviously, we know the tutelage of Nick Nurse, everything that he brought to
Yep.
the table. We see the effect he's having in Philly right now, his system. We all know he's a great coach, but it feels to me that Darko, just from the outside looking in, seems like the perfect coach for this organization and where they're heading going forward. I mean, just I know the vibes around the team were not the greatest last year, and I know
Yeah.
there are a lot of things made of when Philly and Toronto met at the beginning of the season, and how players didn't even look over to the Philly bench.
Right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, I saw that photo of Darko dressed as Jack Sparrow for Halloween,
Yeah.
something I don't know
Yeah.
if I'd ever see Nick Nurse do. Um, just from the first little bit of this of the season, what have been what have been the things you've been most impressed with the Raptors? And obviously, the big thing, I think looming over them ever since, Kawhi left has been, what's the cornerstone piece? What's the vision and the direction? Are we rebuilding? Are we trying to go for the playoffs?
Right.
Kind of like what are we doing? But otherwise, overall, what do you think about the process of basketball in the six right now?
I think what are we doing is a good question to sum up this entire season, maybe the last couple of years of Toronto Raptors basketball, just because you're right. They've been in kind of in the middle of everything when it comes to the Eastern Conference. Not too good to contend, not too bad to kind of wither away and get a lottery spot. So ultimately, it's been a tough go to convince people of what the direction of this franchise is. And it makes it a little bit worse because, they let Fred VanVleet walk last season. They traded Kyle Lowry for, in the summer and didn't really get much back other than Precious Achua. They have moved 2 first-round picks now out the door. So seemingly, by all indications, they seem like they're trying to not contend, but like be a good team. If they're
Yeah.
moving first round picks, the idea is that they're trying to be a good team. They're not trying to use those picks to draft players. But also, Pascal Siakam is a free agent this summer. OG Anunoby
Yep.
is a free agent this summer. Gary Trent Jr. is a free agent this summer. Scotty Barnes is max eligible this summer. So they have a lot of financial implications moving forward. And maybe some of that dictates where this team goes in terms of direction, like you mentioned. When it comes to Darko Rajakovic, he has been, I think, vibes are probably the best way to put it because the difference between last season and this season is completely different. It's like night and day when it comes to the vibes of that locker room. It
Right.
seems like he's empowering a lot of the end of bench guys. You can look at some of the quotes about Malachi Flynn and saying like I just wanted to give Malachi a hug when I got here just because in all honesty, Nick wasn't the nicest when it came to the end of bench guys. He had a short leash on a lot of these guys, and I think that hurt them developmentally. And development is the thing that the Raptors and Darko Rajakovic are focusing on this season. It's how are we going to put Scotty Barnes in a position to succeed? How are we going to squeeze as much juice as possible out of Malachi Flynn or maybe even Jalen McDaniels and Precious Achua and OG
Yep.
Anunoby and all those guys? So I think the process, if you will, what they're trying to do this season is stay the course, see what they're at, see who they're at, see what the direction is, see if the guys are buying into Darko's style. And ultimately, they'll make decisions from there when it comes to Pascal and OG and, the future, if you will. But when it comes to the cornerstone, I think the cornerstone is Scotty Barnes.
Yeah.
And he's made that pretty evident over the start of this season and some of last season and obviously his rookie year. It just seems like he's progressing at a very, very good rate to become the franchise player for this team. Now, how it looks once he gets there and what the team looks like once he gets there, I have no idea because this team is very unconventional in the way that they operate. So
Yep.
I have no idea what they're even going to do if they end up trading a Siakam or OG or whoever.
Masai Ujiri might be one of the most interesting men in basketball, with just the way that he does business and just how behind the under the cuff things are, you know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah,
you can never predict what Masai Ujiri's up to. I
yeah,
absolutely love it. But no, I think that's really well said. And it seems to me like the Raptors are getting back to what put them in this position to begin with, which is
mhm,
focusing on development and prioritizing seeing the guys in house succeed and grow their games, especially
absolutely.
like under the tenure of Dwayne Casey. I know people focus on when he lost his job, kind of unceremoniously, and then won the Coach of the Year award, and there was that whole awkward aspect of it there. I know people focus a lot on that, but I mean there were the years of numerous players who developed under his tutelage in Toronto. And so not that Nick Nurse, isn't a coach that can develop players, but I mean, clearly, if there's those effects on guys, at the end of the bench, being able to have, someone that can come in and just, from everything I've seen, just, is a coach that's about developing players and seeing and wanting to see them succeed. He had this funny quote about Scotty Barnes yesterday, where I think he was talking about how he wants him to focus on those 2 or 3 good things that he can be really good at. And there's like, if you're good at one thing in this league, you have a spot in this league for a long time. If you're good at 2 things,
Right,
you could be an all-star. If you're great at
right,
3
yeah.
things, man, you're like a superstar talent. Like you're one of the best that we have in this league. If you think you're good at 4 or 5 things, you're out of the league and in Europe.
Right.
I
Yeah.
absolutely
No,
I
it's
loved
it's
that
about
quote.
like maximizing, no, I totally agree with you, man. It's like it's about maximizing those skill sets and like finding out what you're good at, right? And
Mhm.
Scotty is this cerebral passer, playmaker type. He's great at seeing the open floor. He's great at making plays for others. That's one thing, right? He's
Yeah.
becoming a really, really good defender, a really, really good defender, help defender. He's working on the off ball stuff, but that's two things, right? The third
Yep.
thing probably ends up being either he is a dominant interior presence, post scoring, just like finishing at the rim, whatever. That's probably what ends up being the third thing. Now we'll see
Yeah.
if the shooting is something that's real. He shot the ball really well to start the season, but ultimately, like those are the things that are those are the benchmarks of what Scotty will be as a player. Um, and I'm excited to see how he grows into that. There's just so much potential for a guy who, I don't know, he's 22 years old now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for him to grow into his game. And it's funny because he was like one of the more raw prospects in that 2021 draft. And I think you'd argue, I mean, I was having this debate in a group chat before, but like if you did like a redraft tomorrow of the 2021 draft, some might argue that he could go number one. Like that, now he's in
Yeah.
the conversation for that. So, and that's no disrespect to Cade or Mobley. They're all great players, but it's just like Scotty has put himself in that category now. And he's looking like an all-star level player right now. So it's special to see him kind of maximize himself, if you will, and get to this point very early in his career. I hope the same for Cade. I really hope that happens at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great, man. Good. There's so much young talent in this league. So much.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's just about every single team, has like one or two players, except the Wizards, has one or two players that you could look at and go, "Oh, I want to watch
Hey,
these guys." And I'm like,
Bilal Koulibaly.
I know.
Trust. I believe in Bilal. Yes.
Oh, I know. No, no. Washington does have some players. They'll figure it out eventually, hopefully. But
Yeah.
no, in all seriousness, though, like I couldn't agree more. And I think with Scotty Barnes as well, people, like to make, conceptions or judge like what a player looks like based off of, like one rough season or how they look in certain stretches. But I think, I think he has every
Yes.
single, he checks every single box of what you look for in a potential future star. And, and on top of that, with the talent that they have in house, I think they really do, have potential to make some noise this season, but also, going forward, they definitely have assets to build a competitive team, in the future. I just think the big thing is making sure they clarify that what we're doing answers sooner rather than later, so they don't end up having situations like the Fred Van Vliet situation of last year reoccur because
Right.
you can only handle losing so many key players from a championship team in free agency for nothing. You just
Preaching
can't
to
you
the
you, you
choir,
can't take
man.
many of those
Yeah.
bumps.
No, yeah, you're
But
right. You're preaching to the choir. I mean, and the thing is, you could maybe argue, okay, it's fine not paying Fred $40 million, right? Like
of
it's
course.
okay. I think
Mhm.
in the end, the Raptors probably made the right decision there to not match that offer that Houston made. But when it
Mhm.
comes to Pascal Siakam, who currently is the franchise player, we're talking about Scotty Barnes, but that's probably the future talk. Right now, Pascal is the best player on this team,
Yes.
and you have him as an expiring contract. Either you re-sign him, which you can at any point in time this season. They can sign him
Mhm.
to an extension right now if they want to, or you trade him and you see what you can get for him. And ultimately, like the doomsday scenario is the Raptors don't sign him to an extension, don't trade him, and they just walk into free agency hoping that they can either sign and trade him or sign him at that point, because then you're in trouble, like you were in the Fred
Yep.
VanVleet situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely gonna be one of those fascinating situations to see the development of, as we kind of, well, as I kind of, start to wrap up a little bit. I don't want to take up too much of your time here. I did want to ask you, you talked about how the Pistons, definitely over the last couple of years have kind of been like your guilty pleasure team. Who's
Yeah.
fit that bill for you this season? And, like outside of the market of teams that you get to really kind of like take a microscope, look at, what teams excite you the most or fascinate you the most throughout this
Mm.
season?
It's tough because I can't say the Oklahoma City Thunder are a guilty pleasure. I am not guilty of anything. They
Oh
are
my
they are
gosh.
so good already. And like I can't even say that they're a guilty pleasure because they're already so good. Same thing with the Minnesota
Yep.
Timberwolves. They're a very, very fun team. I think if there's a guilty pleasure right now that I have, it's probably the Houston Rockets.
Yeah.
I enjoy what they do. I think they're actually probably about as good as they will be right now. They're like 6-4. Maybe they'll be like about a 500 team this year. I love watching Sengun. He's just such a good player, such a good baby Jokic is funny, but like he has his own little wrinkles to his game too.
Yeah.
Um, Watching their young guys grow, I'm kind of excited to see what Amen does once he gets back and he's healthy. So that's probably my guilty pleasure right now is the Houston Rockets, and I'm working on a piece on Jalen Suggs right now, so I guess a little bit the Orlando Magic as well.
Yeah, I think those are two, I mean, just two phenomenal choices. And I think you just look at just the sheer amount of, young talent those teams have. But on top of it, like, like legitimate players that can actually, like Jalen Suggs is a guy who was, really forgotten about from that draft class, in 2021. He's a guy, I know the again, the 3-point shooting, is really gonna be a telltale thing for, what his trajectory is gonna look like. But
Yeah.
Orlando just over the last couple of years, especially ever since that Nikola Vucevic trade, just what they've been able to turn that into in the young core that they've been able to, accumulate out of all of that is insanely impressive. I think, a team that, I've definitely had a lot of fun watching. I think maybe fits my guilty pleasure bill. And again, I don't know if this fits that bill either, is the Indiana Pacers
Okay.
because they
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, just how explosive they've been offensively. Maybe
Mhm.
guilty just because, there's that Pistons fandom
Right. Yeah.
that's there, and the Malice in the Palace is
Yeah. Yeah.
such a core memory. But no, my buddy Troy, who's a co-host on the podcast, lives in Indiana. I think they're, the top offensive team in NBA history through the first like 12 or whatever games.
Right.
Tyrese Halliburton is absolutely special. If they can actually defend at any level, they can be really competitive on a
Oh
night
yeah.
to night basis. But I mean, again, that just speaks to, just from top to bottom, just how many great players there are. And, again, just I think the Bruce Brown addition, I think we'll really start to see the effect of that as the season goes on, especially,
Absolutely. Yeah.
if this team gets to the play-in tournament or like into playoff basketball.
Yeah, no, they're a very fun team, and they have so many young pieces too, like Andrew Nembhard, Ben
Yep.
Mathurin, right? Guys who can kind of like plug and play anywhere. And then they have a defensive monster in Miles Turner. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be a lot of fun for a long time, to be honest with you, just because of the way that they have things built around Halliburton. And hey, they're really positioned well to potentially make a trade at some point too, to upgrade whenever they want to. So we'll see what happens. They're up there with the fun teams in the league.
Yeah. Last question for you. Who is your favorite to win the in-season tournament?
Ooh, I'm gonna say it's the Minnesota Timberwolves. I
Okay.
think
Yep.
the Minnesota Timberwolves are the one to, because like I was having this debate earlier on my own podcast. We were talking about it, but like, no, we were having this debate on my podcast about the in-season tournament. And I think like a team like Minnesota winning the in-season tournament would mean so much for that fan base because they've never won
Oh my
anything,
gosh.
right? Winning
Yep.
the in-season tournament for them would be massive. And I think that would be awesome. So I'm going to say the Minnesota Timberwolves. It'd also be cool if the Indiana Pacers did, because they've also never won anything. So it'd be awesome to
Yeah.
see either of those teams kind of make it far and win that thing.
Yeah, I think the in-season tournament has the potential to really be a platform for future stars to
Yeah.
really cement themselves. And, especially, you talk about these young teams who haven't won anything or who haven't had, that type of postseason success. For every single team to have, a sliver of hope to compete for this tournament, but also to have, the opportunity to play, basketball with additional consequence. I mean,
Right.
you're still playing each and every night, going towards the ultimate goal, which is the playoffs and the championship. But, to have those more tense moments, and I think you've already seen, just through the first couple of weeks. Like I think back to in particular the consequential finish to the Thunder Warriors game. Like there's
Yeah.
just already been, so much generated interest from it already. I think, I think if Minnesota goes to Vegas and we see Anthony Edwards just, put up a 40 bomb or, do the things that we know that he's capable of, on that primetime stage, I think this has a potential to be, like something special for the league going forward.
I
They
totally
gotta
agree with
figure
you.
out the courts. They gotta make those look
Yeah,
they gotta figure
they
those
gotta make
tweak
them less
those a little bit.
slippery. They gotta make them less slippery, man.
Yeah.
Everybody's slipping all over the place with these courts. They gotta make them non-stick. I don't know what's going on. It's just yeah,
Yeah, I heard that was especially an issue in Toronto, right? With the in-season tournament game against Boston. I know Jaylen Brown came out after the game and spoke pretty
mhm.
publicly against it. Were the Raptors complaining about that as well?
No, I don't know, but I think I've seen it around, to be honest with you. I saw, like, Keontae George slip and slide on the Jazz court.
I think
Kevin
Dallas,
Durant.
like, straight up had to at the last second just, like, say, "Nope, we can't even do
Yeah.
our court."
And you know what's funny? Dallas is actually a court that's been talked about a lot for it being too moist. Like, it's too moist in
Really?
the arena. It's too damp in the arena. Pascal Siakam has slipped on that court 3 times and hurt his groin.
Huh.
That's a whole story. The Mavs have had like leaking issues in their arena a bunch of times too. That's like a whole different thing. But hey, maybe the court plus that is an issue. I'm not sure, but a lot
They
of guys are
probably
like
share an
slipping and
arena with the
sliding.
Stars, right? Do they share they probably
Yeah,
share an arena with
yeah,
the
they do.
Dallas Stars, so there's probably that's all yeah, I'm not an engineer, but, I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I don't know, but you're right. They gotta fix the court. See what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. This was such a fun time, man. Thank you so much for coming on the pod and making
Absolutely, man.
time. Again, I think if you're not if you're not following us on Twitter, I think you're one of the best follows on NBA Twitter. I absolutely love the content that you're doing and the
Thank you, man. That's very
different
kind.
angle that you're covering the game from. Be sure people are following you. At just S Berhaney on Twitter. And then what was the name of your podcast? Is It's Objective Basketball Pod, right?
Yes, yeah. So tap in at the Objective Basketball Podcast. That's on SDPN's YouTube channel. It's on all the streaming platforms as well. You can check it out there. But man, I appreciate you, man. That's very kind of you to say. I'm sorry about my mic. I don't know what the hell's
Oh,
going on with
dude.
that. I gotta figure that out. But yeah, no, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, it's the struggle of podcasting, man. It's always a blast.
Yeah,
There's
I
always
know.
different
There's always an
fires you're putting
issue.
out.
Oh
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
always
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Well, yeah, really appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to the second part of the pod here from Half Court. I am joined by the man, the myth, the legend, the Marquette Heat, joining from that beautiful seat. That man that's top of the class with that beautiful attitude, Troy Sergey. Troy, what's going on, my friend?
You caught yourself there, Sean. I
Oh,
thought you would
no,
say,
no, that was planned. That was
okay.
totally planned.
All
I
right.
wanted to throw a little
My heart was
misdirection.
racing a little bit. I didn't want you to say anything, inappropriate.
Oh, I wanted to scare you, Troy. That's
All right.
exact I got I had I gotta keep you a little on your guard sometimes. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Deep breath. We're ready to go.
Oh my gosh, this is gonna be a very different tone than the first half of the first half of the pod. I do this super in-depth conversation about basketball, like all this. Now we're talking about Troy's attitude. Anyway, Troy, it's good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining me on the later part here of the pod. Real quick, thank you so much for Berhani just for joining for the pod. Just had an absolutely great time with him. Be sure you go check him out and support him on social media as well. But Troy, let's talk some Pistons basketball, man. I mean, as of right now, like the Pistons are on that 11-game losing streak. They're currently in a nail biter with Denver. We could potentially have the streak be over. The streak could also very possibly extend to 12, and no one would be surprised.
Mhm.
But, at this current stage, obviously last week we were, it was kind of a depressing pod. We were just like, hey, here's the hoping the streak ends by the time we come back next week. And here we are. It did not, I did not think it was going to end by the time we came this week. So I'm not particularly surprised, if I'm being honest. But Troy, have any of your opinions changed? What has been your thought on the level of play over the last week? Obviously, we can talk a little bit about this game against Denver, but people listening back on Wednesday are going to be like screaming, but the result of the game is different than what you're talking about. Because we're recording this during the third quarter, people. We're still watching, but calm down. Anyway, Troy, what have been your thoughts?
Yeah. Have my thoughts changed since last week? Honestly, a little bit. Just a little bit. I guess I am a little more leaning toward we have to do a trade. I'm kind of in the trade camp right now. I'm definitely not in the Fire Weaver or Monty camp,
Right.
but I do think this roster was not as ready to compete as we would have hoped for it to. Maybe let's say in August when we were talking about the NBA season.
Mhm.
And I think honestly, a lot of that has to do with the depth of the league more than anything else. Of just
For
teams
sure.
are better. Sure, this team is great, but every
On
other team
paper.
is better
Yeah.
on paper, right? But also every other team is better on the court.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and flat out, like Cade said it yesterday, in Toronto as we're recording. I mean, he said we're a bad team right now. Like it's just having like, it's at a point where, it's like, hey, we have to address straight up the things that are shooting ourselves in the foot. It's like over the last couple of weeks, like we've, it's kind of been this like uncomfortable energy of, oh, this team's so close. Oh, this team, like if they could just do this, oh, if they could just do these final couple things. But at a certain point, like the first step of when you have a problem is admitting you have a problem,
mhm.
and I think for, obviously I know people saw that quote and, immediately were like, "Oh no, like Cade's already wanting out." That's not at all what that means. If anything, I felt like that was the leader of the team,
Right.
like using his podium and using his platform to help and give the message that they're saying in the huddle and in the locker room out into the public, because that's the only way that you can make that change is to admit when things are a problem and move forward. We're already seeing a more competitive, product after the fact. I definitely agree with you. Like a trade does need to happen at some point, but I think it is also the tricky thing of, well, you can't really make a move until these veterans get healthy anyway. Plus, it's like it's like we won't really know what this roster really needs until we see the full picture together. And it's again, that's just been the struggle. I think you're getting the clarity of what you need around Cade, but I think we need to get the clarity of how many guys do we have on this roster that actually fit that bill.
Sure. Would you just say with that last part, Sean, of what you need around Cade, is the answer just shooters and scorers, certified bucket getters? Is that really as simple as it is?
I mean, obviously, like to put it shortly, yeah, I would say shooting is definitely the number one thing that this team needs. But I think in general, I think you need more guys that kind of fit that bill of like what Detroit basketball is. You know what I mean? I think you have a lot of young talent, that like that has a lot of potential, but there's certain aspects of their game that that are kind of question marks or might not fit this roster, the greatest. And, like when you look at the entirety of the roster, like you look at guys, like I know Killian Hayes has been a big topic of conversation, as effective of a player as he's been, at points for the Pistons this year. It's a struggle when you don't have that, a guy that can space the floor alongside Cade in the backcourt,
Right.
right? Like, there's there so when so like obviously shooting is a definitely is definitely a big aspect of it. But I mean, I think the other thing as well is just guys who can take the, like the pressure off of Cade, not only on the offensive side of the ball, but guys who can alleviate that pressure for Cade on the defensive side of the ball. Because I think when you really see Cade struggle is when he has to when he has to take on the brunt of the workload on both sides of the court. Because when he
And
has to do,
that gets
he can't be
exhausting for it.
Superman.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, for a guy his talent, it gets exhausting. And I guess defense too. I would say that. I know Assar for a rookie is our best defender. I know we haven't seen as much Jalen Duren as we wanted to this far, but I thought we'd be a little better on the defensive end, at least looking back to like August, right? When I was
Mhm.
thinking of, okay, where would you want to see the Pistons at the first 15 games of the year on the defensive end? A little subpar, especially. I mean, I know it was kind of an anomaly, maybe last night as we're recording against the Raptors. I mean,
142 points.
that
Yep.
defensive nightmare was insane. But even that loss against the Hawks in the play-in tournament, they were missing Trae Young, and they still. I mean, that was DeJounte Murray put up a big game, but even that game too, I thought we were very much better on the defensive end, and we let Atlanta kind of torch us.
I think there's been like I think the frustrating thing is there's the flashes that this team exhibits on the defensive end,
Right, of
because
course.
they have moments where they can take over the game on the defensive side of the ball. But what I would say, like almost kind of to your point, I would say there's too many of those moments where they're caught on their heels, or where they're caught off guard. Like I think if there's any play that describes the struggles that the Pistons are having to start this season, it's that dunk that Evan Mobley had, where he just carried it up the court, very akin to when Domantas Sabonis did the same thing to the Pistons a couple years ago in Indiana, where he just carried the ball right up the court, drove it right into the lane, and dunked it like he was in warmups, and everyone was just looking at each other like, what happened? You know what I mean? It was just like the youth was on full display. Troy, I was going to try to bring up this fact before the pod, because I talked about this a little bit, with S when I had him on the pod. Did you know that MSU's starting five to start the season is older than the Pistons starting lineup?
Wow, I did not know that. That is a crazy perspective.
Cade is 22. Jalen Duren is 20. Jaden Ivey is 20. Kevin Knox, who started yesterday, is 24. He's the only guy in that starting lineup who's older than any of the MSU players who are starting this season. All fourth and fifth year guys. And again, people are like, oh, well, we're sick of the excuses. And this isn't to make an excuse. This is the reality of the fact of this team, has all of their key veterans injured. And and outside of San Antonio is perhaps fielding the youngest team in the league right now.
Right.
And so those mistakes are not surprising when you take that step back and have that perspective. Now, the one thing that they can't, and we talked about this beforehand, and I think we kind of alluded to it a little bit. You can't necessarily control the injuries and the misfortune you have in that aspect, but what you can control is your effort level on a night-to-night basis and your compete level on a night-to-night basis. Because this team puts together good stretches, but it's those moments where they take their foot off the gas. It's those moments where the focus, gets taken away by, getting argumentative with the refs, getting frustrated from turnovers, or just, for whatever reason, just getting disheartened by what's going on in the game. I think those are when we talk about what are the hurdles for a young team to take that next step, I think that those are those big things. And that's where the veterans really make an impact. And so, we've already seen Isaiah Livers come in and make a big, have a big presence on this Pistons bench in just one game against Denver. We've seen how huge of an impact Alec Burks alone has on this rotation. I'm just interested, I'm just interested to see what this team is actually capable of when all of the pieces are actually together. And at this point, it's only about 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most until we actually see that. That's what, just a week or two after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it is hard, especially, the big point I brought up to start, trade. And you said, you can't really make a trade unless you know what you need and what you have. And we don't really even know that fully. It's disappointing as a fan. Frustrating is a better word, not disappointing, frustrating, because this was supposed to be the year, man. I mean, at least not playoffs, but play in, right? Especially it hurts seeing a team like the Magic, start off so well too. I think they're 7-5. It hurts seeing Houston. That probably is the one that hurts the most. I mean, even the Pacers, of course they have Tyrese, who is probably 1.5 years ahead of Cade, right?
Yep.
But yeah, seeing those teams have a short rebuild and I have us be year 4 of the rebuild, and we're still 2-12. Yeah, there's a punch to the stomach feeling, but
It all comes back
yeah,
to the harsh reality of Detroit is still living through the compounding mistakes
yeah,
that they made
yeah.
over the span of time.
And I'll be the first one to admit that because, like, some of these feelings are not new,
Of
right? I mean,
course,
I
yeah.
had some of these feelings as a kid with Ben Gordon and Rodney Stuckey and Charlie Villanueva. I had
No,
these feelings with
this is a 15-year
Yeah,
ongoing thing since like coming up on 16 years since the Pistons have won a playoff game. There was that
yeah,
meme that went viral on social media over the weekend,
yeah, yeah,
where it was, have you won a playoff game since Instagram was founded in 2010? Of course. And then the one team that's no is the Detroit Pistons. Like I saw that, like we all saw that meme, right? But
yeah,
the reality, again, the reality of it is when you don't draft well, when you continually make, those poor decisions, like that's what puts you in this position. And I think that's another reason why it's important to have that conversation, especially when it's like, all right, like the Pistons clearly need to make a move, there clearly does need to be change made in the roster. And I know a lot of people right away went to Zach LaVine. That would be a great addition. But Troy, when you think about going to get a guy like a Zach LaVine further, is that not just Blake Griffin too, Electric Boogaloo? I mean, a guy who has all-star level talent. His game's predicated on his athleticism. He's currently getting to the older point of his career. He has 4 years left on his contract at $40 million apiece. He's a guy that can score at all 3 levels, but has injury issues with his knees and his back. Like when you talk about like going to make a trade, especially, with the salary cap situation that you are getting yourself out of, but ultimately setting yourself up for going forward. I think that's why it's important to say, obviously, change needs to happen. And I totally agree with the urgency of this. At some point things do need to turn around and the momentum does need to go in Detroit's way this season. But these are the exact moments where I think history has the chance to repeat itself, and that's why it's important to have those figures in the front office like Troy Weaver and guys like Monty Williams in-house to have that perspective of where they're at right now, because this was the exact situation where the Pistons traded for Blake Griffin back in 2019 or 2018.
mhm. Right, right, right. And I think the best argument probably that I would have of leading away from a Levine would be, okay, look at Chicago. Does
Mhm,
Levine make them a competitive basketball team? No. And I get they don't have a Cade, they don't have an Ivy, they don't have a Duran. I get all that.
mhm.
But you're still having him be the core, and it's not getting the job done. So what would make him get the job done here would be kind of where I would go. Is that a fair
Yeah, well,
assessment?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's the same thing with Blake. It's
Yeah,
that's why it's akin to that trade where it's like, yes, like both things can be true, where a guy can be an all-star level talent because there are so many guys, in this league who are all-star level players.
absolutely.
But when push comes to shove, of the 24 guys that make the all-star team, I believe now it's what, like 15 each. So I think
Yeah,
like 30 guys who make the
30.
all-star team. Of those 30 guys, only 5 to 10 really make a difference in a playoff series.
Right, which is nuts to think about. Yeah.
And when you look at the trajectory of the Pistons and where they're heading going forward, does Zach LaVine meet a lot and address a lot of the needs that they have right now?
Right,
Absolutely. But
right,
he also, in the same light, would create a whole levy of different issues and potential hurdles that the team would have to overcome going forward. And
right,
so,
and if you think of that analogy that you just made of, okay, you have 30 all-stars, but only 10 make, like, a massive playoff impact, and you go trade for the 24th best all-star, you
mhm,
know?
a fringe all-star guy.
Right, right.
It's just
Yeah,
yeah, and again, like, it's in my opinion, I don't even think the trade necessarily has to be for a Zach LaVine level player. Like, if you could even go get more guys that are kind of akin of the Monte Morris, type of ilk where they are solid veterans who can contribute on a night to night basis. They might not be stars, but they're grown men. I would argue that's, that's where this team is at right now. And, obviously the draft is still going to be, as much as we might not want it to be, the draft is still going to be, like a part of the conversation of how this team has to build going forward, because I don't think, trading the first round pick this year, necessarily, you know, gets them in a different position. And, we're actually going to have our guy Steve from Resball Pod on here soon to talk about the draft, because he actually listened to our last pod, and it was like it was like that scene in Interstellar where he's like screaming for he's like, no, let me in,
That's when you said that there's not any talent in the draft, and then Steve's pounding on the window saying,
he's
"No,
like,
let
you're
me
looking
in,
at
there
the
is."
draft all wrong. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Well,
I
I
was
mean,
just
the
salty,
odds
Steve.
are, I mean, look at the 2013 draft, right? I mean,
Mhm.
probably the worst in our lifetime, minus maybe the 2000 draft. Um, you still got Giannis out of it,
Mhm.
so the elite prospects might not be all that in a
Well,
bag
even
of
the
shit.
last few years, like the
Yeah.
drafts have just gotten deeper and deeper. So it is
Right.
still valuable.
Right.
I think it's just
Yeah.
hard to stomach, thinking about a
Right.
top 5 pick at this
Sure.
stage of the season.
Right. Correct.
But ultimately, I think, obviously, I think the biggest thing is when fans are in this situation where you just see like these types of losing streaks stack up. And I mean, it's been hard. This has
Mm.
been the third 10-game losing streak for the Pistons in the last calendar year.
Yeah.
Like that is a difficult thing to endure as a fan. There is no sugarcoating that.
Right. What
When
are
you're
we? 4 and 35 since trading Sadiq.
I mean, I don't want to think about that number, like personally, I'm good. Granted, some of that was, like let's not kid ourselves, to be able to be in the position to, potentially get a guy like Vic, but ultimately, end up to be able to get a guy like Assar Thompson, because that
Yeah.
was the huge thing, was not sliding, far enough to not be able to get a guy like Assar. Like, can you
Right.
imagine
Right.
if
I mean, very well. I mean, there's a chance in 5 years from now we're talking about the 3 that are right now in the top 3 voting, right? I mean, that we're talking about Chet, Vic, and Assar, and everyone
yeah.
else.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's exciting to know that he has all that potential, and that he could be, and he could even potentially be better than a Chet.
I just think when you again, when you're in this situation, you want to point the finger and go, who's to blame? What, who caused this?
Mhm.
And who's the source of my frustration? Who can I blame it on? Right? And when talking about putting Cade in the position to succeed, and putting those weapons around them. I mean, we talked about how the Pistons made a conscious choice to push back their salary cap space, and to extend their evaluation time with Cade. And ultimately, like going into this year, like the teams that did go and add in free agency, the teams that did, like make moves in the offseason, like Indiana when they went and got Bruce Brown, Houston who got Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet, like those are the teams who are succeeding early, right?
Right.
Like that's just the way it is. But, you know, at the same time, it's disingenuous to not look at the record of what Troy Weaver has gotten in house, because you can't go both, oh, Troy's incompetent, he's got to go, and at the same light go, man, Cade and Duran and Ivy and Assar and Sasser, these guys are awesome, and then
Right.
just not even acknowledge how they got here in the first place.
Right. And your example of the other teams, John, I mean, they're seeing, and yeah, okay, I'll admit, like Houston, right? I mean, they're seeing results, but they also have contracts that I would not feel comfortable if they were on my team.
But you know what else they have? You know what else all those teams have? Continuity. And that's a
Mhm.
big thing I think we're seeing the Pistons struggling with at the beginning of this year, with when we talk about the health, with Cade not being, in the lineup, like for most of last year, you're seeing a lot of those lumps and those things that this team, needed to ultimately see, as far as, okay, what do we put around Cade? ultimately, like, these were the games that the Pistons wanted to be playing this time last year. You know what I mean? I mean, it was this time last year when we came on and talked about Cade having his season-ending surgery.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that was a part of the frustration last year as well. It was Cade. It was
Yep.
that we didn't have Cade, right? And a lot of us, including myself, I really was content kind of at a 17 win season because I knew that Cade would change things around. And
Yeah.
starting off 2-12 doesn't really back up
It's
that theory well. But
right. Right. And again, ultimately, I touched on this a little bit last week. I still think that this season can look very much like the 2022 Detroit Lions, where, this team starts out struggling, but ultimately, I do think they're gonna have winning streaks this season. They're not gonna I do think they're gonna win more than 17 games. I still think 30 wins is possible. Call me crazy. But, like, ultimately, I still think that, this team has a lot of momentum and things to look forward to, because when you look at this team, from a talent perspective, it jumps off the page. And again, we are so close to the point where the veterans are going to actually return in the lineup. Now,
Mhm.
I do think that, like, after, like, this trade deadline on is when, the pressure is going to be on Troy
Yeah,
Weaver to start
absolutely.
delivering. And, he has done a phenomenal job of drafting and of assembling young talent. But now it's about actually taking it to the next level and translating that into an NBA team that can
Mhm.
compete every single night and
Right.
potentially make the playoffs.
And I feel like Troy Weaver is a guy made for that moment and made for that
Absolutely.
pressure. So
But
that doesn't give me a ton of concerns. It actually boosts some confidence knowing that he's at the helm with things. So
right, and again, remember the teams that, like the teams that were quick on the trigger, and made those impulsive trades, the teams like the Chicago Bulls, like the Blake Griffin Detroit Pistons, like perhaps we might even be looking in a few years. I know Sacramento's playing really well right now. I still would vomit knowing that we traded Tyrese Halliburton. That's just
yeah,
me. I
right.
I still, I even though again, Sacramento's in a position where they might be trading for a star, they could be getting in a different situation. I guess, you know what? Yeah, let's talk about the Kings. Screw it. What have been your thoughts on Sacramento?
Yeah.
Do you still think the Domantas Sabonis trade has worked out? I mean, you can't
Well,
say
I
it
mean,
hasn't worked out well
I
for
was
them.
never on board, Sean, even when we had Kings fans on the pod and they were like, "Oh, dude, but De'Aaron Fox, man, he's the keys." And yes, I mean, Fox has been awesome, and I think
He's been
that's
playing
kind of
really
my
well.
thoughts.
His three-point shooting is definitely improved. He's put a lot
Yeah.
of work into that. The guy can take over his game with his athleticism. He's not Tyrese Halliburton.
Right, right. And because he's not Halliburton, I've always said, I've never said, you know what, Sacramento did. I have been saying the same thing since day one of, yeah, Halliburton was clearly had the highest ceiling out of him and Fox, and they chose Fox. They have a great player with Sabonis, but he's not, to me, he's not a guy you want to build your franchise around. And I remember last year, Sean, when they lost in the first round to the Warriors. I think I or Jeff asked you. We said, Sean, what is the Sacramento Kings' future leading into next year? And he said, the Sacramento Kings will just be fine because they'll be the Sacramento Kings again. And I still think that was a fair assessment. I honestly, Sean,
Yeah.
I think I could see a fourth or fifth seed again. I really could. Do I see a first round exit? Probably can too. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, I mean they're fine, but I do not see them beating a Denver, right? Or I would even say they would struggle against the Clippers team. So
Now, what if I told you that according to Shams Charania, the Sacramento Kings are expected to be active in the trade market, and some names that have been thrown around as potential stars that they will be active in conversations about are Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and perhaps even Zach LaVine. Now, I don't see a world where Sacramento makes that trade and doesn't have to give up something that's significant in return. In
Mhm.
particular, with a guy like, like Pascal Siakam, the Kings are going to have to fight like hell to not have to give up Keegan Murray in any trade package. But, ultimately,
Right.
like, would any of those players change your perspective on the trajectory of the Kings?
Maybe Siakam, but nothing more than him. I mean, I think you have to trade Barnes, right? I mean, he's kind of a must
I
in
think
any of
OG
those
Anunoby
trades.
would certainly be an upgrade, but at that point, I still question if they have enough to get past this, even the second round.
Well, like you said, I mean, I would think if you're going to get Ananobi, you're going to have to even put in Murray in a package. And
Either
yeah,
that or a lot of picks. And
right.
and if we're being honest, if there's a team that I would want to trade for their picks, it would be the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah.
Historically speaking, Kings picks have been pretty valuable.
Sure. Right. Yeah. To answer your question, to be totally honest with you, no, Sean. But could they have a better roster and could they maybe get to a second round? Sure. But I still don't see this as a actual more of a pretender, right? An
Yeah,
actual competitive team in the West. So
yeah, 100%. Troy, I would be remiss if we ended this podcast without talking about what just happened with Draymond Green and Rudy Gobert.
yeah,
In that whole situation, if everyone knows about it at this point, but if you were somehow living under a rock, last week, essentially in the in-season tournament, by the way, which
yeah,
has been really lit. I've been really enjoying, and I'm getting even more excited with the actual weekend of games coming up. I think it's going to be really fun. But
mhm,
anyway, literally not even 2 minutes into the game, there was essentially this scuffle between Jaden McDaniels and Klay Thompson, and Rudy Gobert essentially tried to play peacemaker, grabbed Klay by the chest, but Draymond just was like, "Oh hell no!" Nah, and came in and put him in the chokehold and wouldn't let go either.
for
Like he had him
for
in
a
there for
long
like a
time.
solid 10-15 seconds.
Yes.
And Rudy Gobert is not a small human being. And so, honestly, it's amazing that it didn't get more violent than that after there was a chokehold. But Troy, Green ultimately was suspended for 5 games. As of right now, it's been early, but even when Draymond's been on the court with Steph and everyone's fully healthy, the Warriors have been fine. They've been, I think they've been handling the games that they've supposed to be able to handle, so to speak. But it feels like the size of the league is really starting to affect them. Like obviously like we talked about the evolution of the small ball era of basketball. Well, there was only one natural evolution from small ball basketball, Troy. It's bigs who play like small ball basketball. It's 7-footers like Chet and Victor Wembanyama who are shooting threes. It feels like we're watching the Warriors live out the consequences of their greatness in real time.
Yeah, which is a crazy concept to think about. But
Isn't
yeah,
it?
I think you're onto something there for sure. And yeah, I don't know, Sean. I guess maybe this is the one area maybe I've been living under a rock. Has Draymond commented yet on the incident?
So he did not comment on it.
Right.
I the Warriors obviously did. Steve
Yeah.
Kerr, after the game, was kind of in Draymond's defense, talking about how Draymond thought he was grabbing that Rudy was grabbing a Clay's neck, but essentially the day after, Steve Kerr pretty much came out and said it was out of pocket, and pretty much said that the suspension was justified. And
Mhm.
Draymond feels the same way, which,
Right.
I mean, listen, it's great that Draymond feels the same way, but, in the same light, this has been Draymond for quite a while now.
Yeah.
It says a lot that you have Joe Dumars in the front, who
Yeah.
works in the league office as the head of basketball, as the head of basketball operations for the NBA. Like the fact that, he who has a relationship with Draymond Green, who actually knows him really well, came out and was just straight up like, Yeah, we considered his past behavior. Like, he's
Right.
absolutely a repeat offender,
Right. Right.
And
Yeah, which is an honest assessment too. So
yeah, it when there's smoke, there's fire, and with
yeah,
Draymond, it's not just
there's
a
both.
fire at this point, there's villages of ash that
Yeah,
are
yeah.
left behind. You can tangibly point to where the flames were.
Right, right, right. Quick, I know we talked about them last week, Sean, but the Wizards,
Oh, man.
a similar struggle.
Did you see
And
there's already, Chris Haynes already reported that that the Wizards are likely to look to trade Jordan Poole.
which is
And
nuts, 15 games in, you're already saying that. But
I mean, it's one of those things where I can't say I'm entirely shocked, just from his level of play. And also just, we watched that video last week of him in the timeout, that's
right,
kind of just been, like a massive indication of his time in Washington. Like he's I saw this video earlier today of, just kind of talking about the concept of a player losing their awareness
right.
of how they can affect the game. And I can all it almost feels like it almost feels like I can go back and pinpoint the exact moment when it was the beginning of the end for Jordan Poole.
Yeah.
And as messed up as it sounds, it was right when they won the championship, when they were celebrating after the game, when Wiggins was talking about how Jordan Poole's about to be getting paid. Jordan was like, yeah, because from that point on, like, again, I talk about this book all the time, like the book of basketball. The secret to winning basketball is that it has nothing to do with basketball. Once things like, like the concept of more comes in, like, I want more money, or I want more minutes, I want more touches. That's what comes in and affects those types of things. And with Jordan Poole, it felt like that's what it became all about.
Sure.
And it effectively is, I was hoping that Jordan Poole was going to go to Washington, embrace taking the reins of the franchise, and showcase why the Warriors fell in love with him, right?
Mm.
And why they gave him that contract, why they believed that he could be that next generation of Splash Brothers, in Golden State. But instead, I mean, honestly, I think you're looking at, exactly why Draymond has alluded to why it's been so great to not have him in the locker room. And yeah, of course, it's coming from the guy that punched him in the face, and like that's natural to expect. But like, I mean, it clearly is apparent that dude is like he's like a cockroach repellent to a team's
Yeah.
vibe and culture.
Right, right, which is unfortunate because we know the talent's there. We know we loved him in that 2022 playoffs.
Yeah, we
With
saw
the
him win a
finals run.
ring.
So right, right, yeah, yeah. No, I definitely wanted to hear your comments because I thought too. I wasn't sure how the Wizards were gonna deal with him as far as did they expect to maybe build around him? Was he strictly a contract just to have as you're going through a rebuild, contract dumper, if you will.
He's
But
definitely helping them tank, and
right,
they got him he got them a first round pick. The question is, are they
yeah,
going to have to trade one or two to get him out of Washington?
right. Which I wouldn't have guessed that 3 weeks ago. I really wouldn't have. But
Yeah.
we're seeing it. So
Yeah, and it's sad too because, like, when you look at again, like you talk about how deep this league is, like 5 years ago, Kyle Kuzma and Jordan Poole would have been a hell of a lot more interesting.
yeah,
Like like
yeah,
like in the mid 2010s, that could have perhaps been like a fifth seed in the East with
yeah.
with where the talent levels were at.
Right,
But
right,
in today's NBA, that's the worst team in basketball. And I
right.
mean, that's saying
Yeah,
something because I mean,
yeah.
we just talked about a team who's lost 11 games in a row.
It's crazy, Sean. It's crazy. This game's getting interesting too. Our Pistons, but
Yeah. Yeah,
our fans at home will know how this finish.
yeah, we could be watching this become 12 in a row in real time. That's a really fun way this pod could end. Troy, it's always fun to be able to hop on with it.
It
Thanks for
is.
making the time. And
Absolutely.
thank you for those at home for tuning in and joining us. This is From Half Court, where each and every week we sit down, talk all things NBA basketball, Detroit basketball, generally joined by myself, Troy, and Jeff. But sometimes we have some friends who join for the fun as well. Be sure you follow Esfandiar Berahini on Twitter and all the work that he does. Thank you again to him for joining the podcast as well. And Troy, be sure you go follow him as well. My guy at Troy Sergey 44 on X. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.